Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker. When I first arrived here at Fox 10 in 1993, one of the first stories I covered was the savage murder of 17-year-old Melanie Burness, who was simply out riding her bike near Metro Center Mall when she was stabbed in the back, sexually assaulted, dumped in the Arizona Canal, 17 years old. And it mirrored the murder of 21-year-old Angela Brasso, who was killed in much the same manner a year earlier. Same area, riding a bike, same MO. Detective Troy Hillman with Phoenix PD devoted years of his life trying to find the killer, and he eventually did. He has now written a book due out in October on Amazon, Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter, the true story of a small-town accountant, an elite group of detectives, and Arizona's most terrifying cold case. Troy Hillman joins me on Newsmaker. Troy, great to see you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate being here.
Boy, you poured your heart and soul into this case. You were a CPA before you got into police work. Is that right?
Yeah, I always joke. It was a blessing and a curse. I was really good at it. I did really well in the CPA exam, but it really wasn't what I wanted to do at all. And I eventually decided to kind of back out of that and become a detective or join the Phoenix Police Department.
Okay, my brother is in that line of work. He was a partner with Ernst & Young, and all I know about CPAs is they are detailed-oriented guys. So did that level of excruciating detail help make you the detective you turned out to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those skills they parlay well together. I think, just getting down in the nitty gritty and sifting through a lot of facts. But this case, I just want to say I had help. This was a complete team effort. There were a group of us that worked on it. So I had the luck, the draw of being the team leader or sergeant at the time.
Let's go back to 1992, the murder of Angela Brasso. She goes out for a bike ride near Metro Center Mall and doesn't come home. And she's later found decapitated, right?
Yeah, she was found the next day, decapitated, and there was horrific cuts to her body, left nude with shoes and socks still left on.
So that starts this odyssey, trying to find who in the world would do that. And then a year later, Melanie Burness, the case I covered, she's out riding her bike. Metro Center Mall, goes through a tunnel and somehow ends up off that bike. We have ideas, but it seems like she was stabbed in the back and taken. And she was actually taken maybe from the crime scene. Is that possible? And then redressed?
It actually looked like the perpetrator attacked her east of the tunnel and then drug her a considerable distance into those oleanders, bushes of a sort, redressed her, performed sexual acts, and then for whatever reason he decided to drag her back into the canal.
Okay. This case stuck with everybody who touched it, and there were no answers. There were theories that maybe it was and I don't want to disparage truckers, but maybe it was somebody in an industry that comes and goes, and maybe he was gone. Maybe somebody had done this and ended up in prison. There were all kinds of theories about two savage murders back to back within a year, 11 months, and then nothing. What was happening during that time with Bryan Patrick Miller, who eventually became the suspect?
Well, the original investigators did, and everybody involved did a fabulous job. If I always say from a cold case perspective, if they don't do it well on the front end, then we can't do our job on the back end. So with that said, Miller was working kind of jobs. He security guard, kind of entry-level positions. At St. Vincent de Paul was one assignment, and some other, but he was living in the Phoenix area.
So he was around. Did you guys ever interview him early on? Was he in the file when you crashed the file? I think it was 2012. Is that right? When you started diving in?
We picked up the case and decided to work it as a team in 2011, the fall of 2011, and we spent 3.5 years from that time really kind of hunting him down. He was in the files, and it kind of took us a while to get there, and some bizarre twist, and maybe a little divine intervention, and a genealogist.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get to that. So his name is actually in the case file. He was interviewed under what pretext? What was the reason he would have been in the police reports initially?
So he wasn't interviewed, but he was an anonymous tip had come in that they had seen him with the bodysuit that was used to redress Melanie, the second victim. And there was a host of a couple incidents, all of his rap sheet, everything that he had done as a juvenile was in that file. And the file was relatively, probably half-inch to an inch thick.
This was a guy who was actually known to police because he went around town as this cartoonish character cosplay known as a zombie hunter. It was an elaborate car, elaborate masks. It was, kind of a Comic-Con thing, but he did drive a pseudo police car, and officers were pictured with him, taking pictures with him at these events. Nobody seemed to have a clue, and this is not a knock on the police, but nobody really around him had a clue that he could potentially be capable of this.
That's right. A lot of serial killers, and kind of something we learned during our investigation was a lot of these serial killers are very intelligent, and they like to do what the profiler described as sarcastic ruses, where they're kind of hiding in plain sight, like saying, "Look at me, you guys didn't figure it out. The police are dumb," that kind of thing. So that's exactly what he was doing. He was hiding behind a mask and kind of parading around, and I feel bad for those officers because they've been postered all over the media. For they wouldn't have known that Miller was responsible. So
in the time between the 92 killing of Angela Brasso and then Melanie Burness in 93, what about the years following that? Do we know a lot about what he was doing? He was still here, but there were incidents in Everett, Washington, were there not?
yeah, so he ended up getting married to his now ex-wife Amy in the mid 90s. I believe it was 95 or 96. They decided to move to be closer to his mother in Washington. They moved there for a period of time, had their daughter Sarah, and he actually did some misdeeds there where eventually he was caught and went through actually a trial, but convinced the jury that kind of he was not guilty and that kind of thing. So he was let go.
He
And
had,
then
he
came
had,
back.
he had attacked a woman, a young woman, on a trail, a hiking trail, right?
Yeah, he had attacked a woman by the name of Victoria Mickelson and stabbed her, I think, over 20, 25 times. Somehow she survived miraculously, thank goodness. And she described Miller. In fact, after the arrest, she told the group of detectives that went back there from Arizona, that's him, that's the guy who attacked me. And unfortunately, the case files have been thrown out by the authorities in Washington. So there's not a lot we could have done.
So there was a history there. Then
Yeah.
enters Colleen Fitzpatrick, who I just had on the program a few weeks ago. She's called the godmother of forensic genealogy. So there was DNA material on both Melanie Burness and Angela Brasso. So you guys use that and then team up with Colleen Fitzpatrick to try to find out a family connection and then start to close the circles, right?
Absolutely, and this is 2014. We had never heard of forensic genealogy and its application to law enforcement. This is 4 years prior to the Golden State Killer, where they used it successfully on that case. So this is groundbreaking, and it took several months to get it approved because it was labeled as witchcraft or voodoo, and nobody seemed to understand how she was able to take a strand of DNA and come up with a surname. So it was definitely groundbreaking. It was groundbreaking for Phoenix PD, groundbreaking for the state of Arizona.
Well, and think about, getting a surname, you get Miller. I mean, you can't get much more common than that. But then when you start to get into geographic location, the door starts to narrow a little bit, right?
So we had flown back to Philadelphia and talked to a group called the Vidocq Society. They're kind of nicknamed the modern day Sherlock Holmes, and there's books out on them, and they're what I call the upper echelon of law enforcement. And one of the main takeaways from them was basically Oh, in these type of cases, there's over a 97% chance that he's somewhere in your files. And we just kept scratching our heads saying, we're going through the files, but it's taken us a while. And to try to get the DNA from all these guys is very, very difficult because they're scattered all around the world.
So you get down to 2 or 3 people, Miller, and then Bryan Miller. Were you part of that interview team that took him out and got his DNA off a water glass?
Yes, I was there. One of my detectives actually set up the ruse to get his DNA, but the rest of my team was there, kind of making sure everything went as planned.
He was calm, cool, and collected in that meeting with police, right? What was the reason you were interviewing him? And he brought his daughter.
Yeah, he did bring his daughter, which kind of threw a curveball because we wanted to keep an eye on what utensils he touched, straws, cups, what he drank out of, that kind of thing. Um, but we managed to get through that. We basically it was Clark Schwarzkopf's idea on my squad, who's a phenomenal detective. We got tired of watching him. He worked at an Amazon facility, and we were kind of trying to collect something surreptitiously, i.e., a cigarette butt or a cup or a straw or something. But for that matter, he was a kind of a model citizen. He never threw anything out. He just sat in his car and listened to loud music. So Clark kind of got tired and called me up and said, "Hey Troy, what about this ruse?" And basically, it was a job interview ruse as more of a security guard, kind of watching that parking lot. So Miller took the bait, and he basically showed up at Chili's to basically conduct the interview.
And his lips go on the water glass. And what was your thought?
Well, it was kind of interesting because he ate a whole sandwich and fries, and he took one drink. And so I think all of us were kind of shaking our heads, saying, "Well, that was a swing and a miss, and there's no way we got his DNA, and we're gonna have to do it again." And we were disappointed. We'd spent like I said 3.5 years ruling out individuals and had been on this roller coaster ride. And now we were thinking, hey, we didn't get it this time, so we're going to have to come up with another plan.
He's still insisting he didn't do this. What do you say?
I mean, his DNA was all over both scenes and both girls, and he was never able to explain that, nor should he be able to explain it because it was definitely it was basically seminal fluid that was found. So, but he denied everything and basically kind of took the route of blaming his mom for all of his angry deeds.
So after the Chili's situation, you've got the water glass, you've got his DNA on it, you test it, and it's exactly matching the DNA that's found on Melanie Bernis and Angela Brasa.
That's right. And it was kind of, we were trying not to think about it. We'd been so excited about so many individuals, perpetrators, that we thought were perpetrator in the past. But we got a knock at the door. We were kind of a grant meeting, kind of low level. And basically the whole lab team kind of entered into our conference room. And it was odd because the lab is pretty new, pretty pristine, and headquarters is not so much. So to have them, we usually went to them. They didn't usually come to us. So they have the whole lab DNA team show up on our doorstep, so to speak, and tell them that was odd. And we just all kind of stood there, and they said, Kelly, the leader said, "Hey, it's him. It's you got him. It's Bryan Patrick Miller." And all of us just kind of were shell shocked because again, we pretty much invested 3.5 years of our lives hunting this down this guy. So
Troy,
it was so much relief.
When you knew that and you made the arrest, were you there when they arrested Bryan Patrick Miller?
I didn't physically go to the Amazon facility because of the degree of his crimes, even though they'd happened years ago. We sent our SWAT teams. A couple of my detectives went to just oversee, but the SWAT teams wanted to be there. A lot of them had, daughters of their own, or kids of their own, and had been around during the original scenes and wanted to get this guy.
What was his reaction? Did you get it? You got it secondhand, but what were you told his reaction was?
I think he was very he's got a good mask of the sorts. He acts very surprised and just kind of shy and quiet. He didn't really put up any resistance, and he just kind of went along. And then that's when the interview happened.
Were you part of that interview in Phoenix PD when they brought him in?
We had strategized probably the best person on our team to put in there, and it was William Shira. He's a phenomenal interrogator, interviewer, because he really brings out a person kind of out of their shell and then kind of moves in. So William did a phenomenal job on that interview. So we just sent him in. We really didn't want to send a female in because Bryan obviously did what he did to females.
Man, that has got to be such a tricky interview when you finally got your guy. Did he give up anything that was incriminating in those interviews?
Well, we were hoping, as most interviews, for a full confession. But what we got was kind of the next best thing, which was a denial of ever being there at the crime scenes. He said some kind of funny stuff that was kind of that sarcastic ruse of he's afraid of knives and he's afraid of the canals at night, where we all know that he's not, and he was there and he likes knives and that kind of thing. So. He basically set up his defense for years later, which was "Mom made me this monster," that kind of thing. He went
Yes.
on and on.
And they tried to a trial. When he went to trial, the defense tried to say that he had suffered some kind of schizophrenic amnesia. I don't know the exact term, but he even said he didn't buy that.
Yeah, basically it was this, from what I read and understood, and I attended some of the court, was it this disassociative?
Dissociative amnesia.
Yeah,
Yes.
that it wasn't. There was almost like this Jekyll and Hyde, this evil Bryan that took over. But there were some holes that I thought of in that story because it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, the nagging question now is, and I've got to ask you, there are two murders, and you know them well, Brandy Myers, Adrian Salinas. Brandy Myers was 13. She went missing while collecting money for a school bookathon in May of 1992. That's a few months after Angela Brasso's killing and in between the Melanie Bernis killing. She was last seen alive 2 doors down from where Bryan Patrick Miller lived. Do you think he is responsible for that case?
Absolutely. And in fact, as we were interviewing Bryan, we pulled in his ex-wife, Amy, and she told us as much that basically Bryan had admitted during their marriage that uh, he called her a Girl Scout collecting money, but he alluded and kind of described the Brandy Myers situation. So he told her play by play what happened. And then that's when we kind of our missing persons detail. They had that case and they ran with it and did a great job, search warrant and whatnot at the area that he was at the time.
But he has not been charged with that, right?
No, that's a no, what we would call a no body homicide, which is incredibly difficult, and because Brandy's body was never found, and just the crime scene, we weren't able to find any blood of her blood or that kind of thing. So it was just all circumstantial. It was basically what the ex-wife was saying, and that kind of his physical proximity to her.
A year later, the case of Adrian Salinas. This is June 2023 or 2013. She's 19 years old. She's at a party in Tempe, 5 a.m. She texts her boyfriend saying she was going to come over, calls a cab, never made it to the cab. And it turns out that Bryan may have been in the area that night. Do you think he's responsible for that murder?
Personally, I do, but I think there's that step of trying to prove it. I think Bryan's good for many more that we don't know about and that only he knows about. We tried and looked for other murders and put out beyond bolo we call bolos to other agencies. So yeah, I think he's good for that one and many more.
Do you have a rough count, Troy, of how many killings he might be associated with?
I can't quantify it. I would say that you don't start off doing what he did to Angela in '92, and the likes of Brandy in '92 also, and then Melanie '93. You don't start off there and you don't end there. And one of the FBI's profiles, they basically said killer would not stop. And that was one of my main takeaways from that.
No kidding.
Yeah.
It's a frightening prospect because, again, he was mingling around this community and very, out there with the cosplay, and he would be at public events, and he hardly was hiding in his house. I had on Keen Azariah on this program as well, who's written a book about him and was a friend of his. Very curious guy. I think Bryan Patrick Miller's a pretty smart kid, man now, but this stuff is so diabolical.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff we found inside of his home spoke to more of what kind of individual he was. Horrific, deviant art, and the way he believed women should be treated. It really was shown in the search warrant on his house.
In what way?
Just lots of pornography that indicated women being cut and abused and just stabbed and that kind of thing. He just had a fascination with knives. He had a fascination with detectives and detective movies and that kind of thing. So he just lived in this kind of deviant world, but all the other people around him seemed to think that he was just shy, kind of nice guy.
Wow. Even his ex-wife said that he tried to get her into some of these proclivities that she wasn't comfortable doing, but he wanted her to.
Yeah, he tried to cut her hair during their sexual activities. He tried, sticking pins in the private parts. He was definitely deviant, even with her.
Are these sex crimes for the most part, do you think, Troy? Is that what the motive is, or is it something else?
I think, Brian, from what I gained in working with a profiler from the VDoc Society was basically had these elaborate fantasies, and it involved the destruction of females.
Wow. You've got kids of your own. I'm just curious on a personal level, because I've fought this battle too when I'm really involved in a story that kind of consumes you. How would you leave this stuff at the office, at PD?
It's definitely tough. I think you have to compartmentalize things and just kind of put it in a locker, so to speak, and leave it there. But yeah, I would tell my wife, I'm like, hey, don't go riding along the canals with your headphones on. Be aware, that kind of stuff. And it definitely bleeds over. But you have to strike a balance between being you don't want to be overprotective, but you want to be careful. So it's difficult.
What was the biggest hurdle in this case when you look back on it?
I think the massive amount of information. Not only were the reports inches thick, but the files were strewn about. It was pre-DNA, so there's just a lot of factors. It was tough pre-internet to really search, newspaper articles and that kind of thing easily. So there were a lot of hurdles and challenges.
Do you think Bryan Patrick Miller thought that he had gotten away with it and that no one would ever figure this out?
I do. Although I wonder if he was watching the advances in DNA. But yeah, I think he thought he got away with it. The prevailing opinion when we started looking at the case was he has to be dead. Basically that he was in the DNA system since the late 90s, if not to early 2000s, and never hit, and nothing like this had ever been reported as happening. I think he definitely thought he got away with it.
The implications of this, and I talked to Colleen Fitzpatrick about it, the genetic genealogist. Nobody now is safe. I mean, if you've got any DNA with this genetic genealogy, they can find you. I mean, it has really revolutionized cracking cold cases.
Yeah, it was a game changer for us, for sure. I always do say that we would eventually looked at that file, we started with the A's and Z's, and we're kind of working towards the M's and N's. But she definitely expedited that, and definitely was a kind of a hero that swooped in and kind of pointed us in the right direction. So yeah, genetic genealogy has just blown up. It is powerful. I'm so glad we have it, and it's law enforcement's able to use it as a tool in the toolbox.
You know, to your credit and Phoenix PD's credit, she told me on the program, it may have been off air, but she said that Phoenix was one of the first places where you guys had an open mind about what she was doing. You described it earlier that people were calling it voodoo and witchcraft. She said you guys actually gave her a hearing, a fair hearing on what she could accomplish. For people who didn't see that program, can you kind of give us just a quick summary of how she did what she did to find eventually Bryan Miller?
She basically called us and left a voicemail initially and said that she was a forensic genealogist and she'd like to help us. And so I ran it by our DNA supervisor, Kelly, and I said, hey, you know, what's going on with this? And she said, hey, Troy, it's worth a shot. It's gonna be a thing. It's emerging, and hear her out. So we picked her up. She was at a training conference. She put on a PowerPoint for us, the team, and we were blown away. And you know, I like to think we're halfway intelligent, but it kind of went way over. She has a PhD from Duke,
No.
and so she's a brilliant
Yeah.
woman, and she's able to kind of explain it. But I still, to this day, I could not re-explain it, and I would leave. I always am a big believer of leave it in the hands of the experts.
Okay.
But I did tell our chain of command we're not giving any secrets about the murders to her. We're just giving her a strand of the perpetrator's DNA, or basically the numbers.
And from that, she kind of links it in a database to a family. And then from there, you start to close the circles. Okay, which part of the family? Who lives in Phoenix? Which Miller lives in Phoenix? Who would be in the appropriate age? There's all kinds of things, but she ends up coming up with Bryan Miller. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, the fact that she gave us Miller, which you alluded to earlier, was a relatively common name, but the fact that he was in our files, with the five files of Miller's, but I always remember file 668, was Bryan Patrick Miller, and
Wow.
it was just amazing.
You know, I got to ask you about that. When he became the guy, you had gone through those files over and over and over. So you recognized that name. You're like, this guy's in our file.
Actually, we weren't quite there yet. Our files were massive, so we were kind of just working our way. Clark was taking the A's, and I was working to the Z's, and the other detectives were getting DNA from people we would sift out. We found Miller kind of at the guiding hand of Dr. Fitzpatrick, Colleen.
Yeah. Do you believe other charges will end up going against this guy for other killings, or do you think that that ship has sailed?
I think, unfortunately, unless he talks and kind of gets it off his conscience, that it will, unfortunately, the ship may have sailed, because I think other agencies really looked at their cases, and we tried to figure out what else he had done, both domestically and internationally.
Do you think there's a chance that he will eventually talk? Because he is prone to talking.
I hope so. I know another reporter tried to talk to him, and then I know a detective tried to talk to him, and he's maintaining his silence and/or innocence. And I know he has to go through an appeal. Maybe once the appeals process is through, he'll talk. But I hope one day he'll kind of fess up to everything he's done, and if nothing else, for his family and his daughter.
Two more things, and then I'll let you go. You've been really gracious with your time. I appreciate it. If and when he ends up executed, will you be there?
I was actually asked that the other day. If I'm invited, I would go. But again, that's out of my control. But certainly.
Would you want to be there?
I would say yes. I saw the pictures of what he did to Angela and Melanie, and that resonates. You'll never unsee those photos, and nor will my team.
And that gets to my final question. What have you learned from this? As a human being, what have you learned from this odyssey?
Um, well, my my wife would say, "Don't always trust that I don't always trust people around me." But I think that's mainly police officers in general. There's a lot of people that are hiding kind of in plain sight. But I try to balance that with there's a lot of good people out there. So
That's kind of my theory. I think 99% of the people are fantastic, but you do have a 1% you better watch out for. And
yeah, absolutely.
it's scary because, again, these people can be right in front of your eyes, and we don't know.
Yeah, there were a lot of people that we interviewed that were still, and probably to this day, are in disbelief that Bryan could have done something so heinous back in the day. So they actually argued with us or told us that no, he didn't do it or that kind of thing. But again, we had
All right, I'm going to give the book one more plug. It comes out in October, right?
yeah, October 7th of this year. I put a lot of heart and soul and passion into it, and to me, it speaks to what I'm trying to get across, which is cold cases matter, and leaders need to fund cold case squads, missing person squads. It's important.
Amen. Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter, the true story of a small town accountant and elite group of detectives in Arizona's most terrifying cold case. Troy Hillman, it's great to spend some time with you. I really appreciate you and admire your work.
John, it's an honor too, and I admire what you've done over the years. Likewise, thank you.
You bet. We'll see you next time. Thank you to Troy Hillman.